Hey Noam, how are you doing? This is Micro Budget Madness, and we're glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk shop with you here today about films and whatever else you have in store.
Excellent. All right, so let's first start talking about your new film, Disappearing Boy. Firstly, what's the film about?
Yeah, so it's a kidnapping thriller. It's sort of a psychological thriller, and it's about this man. Character's name is Eddie, and there's sort of a cold open. The first scene in the movie is we see his son go missing, and then we cut to a year later, and a lot has transpired in that year. So as we learn throughout the film, he's now on the run. He had chased down sort of the wrong suspect, and gotten himself in a lot of trouble with the law, and now he is estranged from his ex-wife, who he thinks might have information about where his son is. So really the film is about him and his ex-wife. The character's name is Jessica, and they're reuniting a year after their son disappeared in hopes
Yep,
of finding him
cool.
before it's too late,
So it's
essentially.
a bit of a mystery thriller with a relationship drama on top.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Cool. That sounds really intriguing. What inspired this idea?
So it was sort of a few things. So on the one hand, I had my first son a few years ago, and I was just thinking a lot about the ways that your brain sort of changes when you have kids, and how you start thinking about, like, all the ways you want to protect the kids, and the things that the dangers out there, and this and that. So I was trying to kind of funnel that energy into a story, but at the same time, I also wanted to tap into this idea that I've had for a long time of making a film with no crew, which I've
Mhm.
never done. I've thought about it every time I've made a movie. I always thought maybe I'll just go with really minimal gear and I'll shoot the whole thing myself, just to kind of prove to myself I can do it. And I never did it. I had another film I was going to make right before this one that sort of
Mhm.
fell through. And then I just decided, you know what, rather than take a year to kind of write a script, maybe raise money for it, maybe not, and see what happens, why don't I just do something I could start today? And that might actually mean writing a script that can evolve over time, and that can
Yep.
change, and that we can shoot in little blocks, which is, as you might know, what we did on this film. We
Mhm.
basically shot, and when I say we, it was me and usually two actors on any given day, sometimes
Yep.
three, one, but it was basically just us, me with a camera and audio recorder. And then I wrote the full, treatment in the first act. And then we shot the first act over the course of a couple of days, took a month or two off, shot, a few more days. And we just kept doing that, writing, shooting, editing
Yep.
in tandem. And then after, by about like 9 months into the process, we had the movie fully shot. And then I
Mhm.
spent the remaining several months after that just really putting the edit together and color. And, I did even the post, I did
Yeah. Wow.
basically all of that myself. So it took a long time because it was a lot of placing
Yep.
sound design and all that.
Cool. So even the sound design, music, was a complete one-man show
So
for.
actually, music, I
Mhm.
had my friend and composer Craig Saltz, who's super talented.
Uh,
He's worked with me on a bunch of other projects. So he was, I think, literally the only person involved in post production, and he was one
wow.
of the only people that saw the movie because
Yep.
while I was working on it. And it's helpful because he's always had like really good feedback for me, even on like stuff outside of music. So he was really helpful. But I even worked with him a bit on the music. We didn't use this cue, but there was one cue where I recorded a guitar track that he was going to
Mhm.
use, and I actually decided just to remove it from the movie. But yeah, it was a fun collaboration. I'm hoping on the next film we'll even get more collaborative with the music, because it's something I've been wanting to kind of dabble in a little bit more.
That's fascinating. I'm so like amazed that you pull this off one person crew. I think it's a little crazy to tell you the truth. Like we shot a feature late last year, and for most of it, probably 70%, it was myself and my partner Sarah who were the crew. Some days, what we had an extra production assistant Lena had, but we were absolutely exhausted at the end of every day. At the end of the shoots, we were pretty much burnt out. So the fact you went and done this, with just like all by yourself is just amazing to me. Would you do this again?
I definitely would. And I think it's funny because I totally hear what you're saying. And like, I've had those experiences too, where I've had small crews or done things just with a friend and then felt exhausted. And I think I'd done it enough times that by the time I made this film, one of the intentions I had for it was that it would feel sustainable to make, that, you know, we could have short days. Some of our shoot days were like 3 hours, you know, some of them were longer, but even the longer days were very casual and very relaxed. But one of the things that we did was, you know, every morning before we filmed, we would meet at the location and just talk through the scenes. And so there might be a day like my favorite scene that we shot, which was in the beach in Malibu on this like cliffside, you know, kind of angle that we got. And that was like just me and the cast and crew. Me and the cast, there was no crew, sitting down for lunch or brunch or whatever you'd call it at the beach, talking about the idea, going through the scenes, figuring out how to make it better. And then 2-3 hours in, we get up from the table to actually start like working. But we're at that point, we're well fed, we're in a good mood, we're at the beach, we've talked about the idea, we're all on the same page. And then we go and hike up the side of this cliff because we didn't like the angle from down below. So we hike up and we're like, yeah, this looks great. And then we spent, you know, I basically just let the audio roll and let the camera roll. And we improvised, how are we going to frame this and shoot it? And how are we going to get all the coverage? And then, you know, a few hours later, we're done and we go home and we beat traffic. So it's like, for me, it was more about like, yeah, how do we make it not only a good movie with a very small crew, but how do we make it operate as a really great set where it doesn't have to have that feeling that most experiences I've had on set, you know, turn into, where you just feel like at the end of the day, like you're just so exhausted and drained. And there's definitely a bit of that on this, but we kept it under control, I think.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like you took an approach where you deliberately went slow rather than trying to cram as much as you could each day. You took your time, you spent extra time working with the actors, and you just made sure your things are going to be slow and steady and therefore enjoyable for everybody.
Exactly. And I think that there's an illusion that when you're on set and when it feels fast paced, that you're actually getting more done. But from my experience, I got a lot more footage in the can per day working like this. So even though we might only shoot for a much smaller block because we're kind of being more casual and we're talking, or, oh, you know what, we should get another piece of wardrobe. Let's go walk over to Target and, you know, go buy something. It was that sort of thing. So yes, it was definitely more casual and it felt like a much slower pace for sure. But in terms of what it actually manifested in terms of the raw footage, I got way more coverage than any of my other films. I had way more like shooting ratio of like raw footage to final. And that was because we knew what we were doing. Like most times on set, you could have a 12-hour day, but you're really only shooting for like 2 hours because you're setting up a light. And then, you know, you get caught up in the technicalities of, you know, trying to match the hair light between two shots and then pulling up playback. And then, you know, one of the crew members, you know, has an idea you want to try. And then before you know it, it's lunch. So it feels like you're shooting and you're doing all this stuff. But then at the end of the day, you're like, oh, wait, we spent so much time getting this one angle like a bunch of times. And then we didn't get enough coverage of all this other stuff we needed. And we didn't have any time to try new ideas. So in this film, it was like, yeah, it very much felt slower, but we were actually charging ahead in a weird way faster and getting more footage per day than if we kind of did it the other way. So it was a really unique thing. And I definitely would want to do it again, if nothing else, just for that benefit, because I thought that was, you know, something that surprised me for sure.
I like it. It's like a relaxed approach to filmmaking. And it's an industry where often people are not that relaxed. So I really like this approach.
Yeah.
You went natural lights with this one. You didn't use any artificial lights. Is that correct?
No, not at all. I mean, the only artificial lights are like available lights. So if we were in a motel room, we could turn on and off the light. We could shut the blinds. We could, you know, close a door or open it a crack to let some of the light from the bathroom seep in. But that was it. And that was very much part of this whole idea of like keeping it really simple, keeping it very streamlined, is that there would just be no way that if I was trying to light it myself And I can light, I understand. I'm not by trade a DP, but I've DP'd a bunch of stuff, and I have lights, and I definitely am comfortable lighting in the style that I like, but I'm also very comfortable with natural light. I love the aesthetic of natural light. I love the flow on set. And a lot of the shots that we got, if I had lights with me, I know that they wouldn't have looked as good, because I would have thought, like, there's this one shot, for example, where Gabriella, who plays the Jessica character, is like laying down on a bed facing the window. And I would have lit it with, whatever soft light, and tried to like push it and really like make it look, like daylight. But we had a window, so we just opened up the blinds and waited for the right time of day, and the natural light floods in and hits her face. And it's one of my favorite shots sort of in that sequence. And it's faster and I thought looked better. So natural light was a huge part of making it possible.
It reminds me a bit of Terrence Malick's approach, because he's using a lot of natural light for his films these days. Like I think I saw Hidden Life not long ago, and like that film looked beautiful, but it's also just very free flowing and just responding to the moment. Which brings me, like, you said you had a script, but it also sounds like you're using improvisation at the same time.
A little bit. So it's funny, because I would have been open to doing even more improv, but I think most actors that I've worked with, at least, even those that are skilled in improv, they often like to have some sort of script, because they want to feel grounded in what they're doing, and they want to at least know if they're deviating from something, like what was it supposed to be to begin with. So in this case, before we filmed any scenes, we had every page written. So like I actually wrote, the first thing I sent the actors was the full treatment. Then I wrote the full first act. Then I wrote, second act, third act. But let's say our first couple of shoot days, we have the first act. So the actors would actually read through the lines. We'd kind of do a rehearsal. And then the part that was improv was more almost like, it wasn't necessarily like literal improv. It was just being flexible with things like dialogue and blocking and ideas for the scenes, where we might just be sitting, like I said, at breakfast or something. And then someone says like, oh, why don't we just cut out like half of these lines and instead have us look at each other or do a glance and then maybe add a few lines at the end. So by the time we were shooting, it was usually like fairly scripted. But I was always like of the mind that, okay, now we have it. Let's just do a take where you guys just go off the rails and do whatever you want. And sometimes that's my favorite stuff. But yeah, I think like one thing about improv is it's the degree to which that you're able to use improv successfully, I think, is something that you figure out as you go, because it's a big, it really comes down to like you as the director, your actors, and then what both of your comfort levels are with like how far off the book you want to get. And then, and in our case, it took us a few days, but I think we found a rhythm where like, okay, we can rework these scenes, but by the time we hit record, the actors probably want to know generally what they're saying. And then we get a few takes of that, and then we can go crazy with it. So, we found our rhythm.
Yeah. For the records, I'm an improvised filmmaker. My last 4 or 5 features have all been improv, so I can hear, what you're saying. Like, I really enjoy that method. I find it so authentic, like in terms of performances, and you never quite know what's coming next. So the actors are just forced to listen to their partner and just respond to their partner. So I'm a big fan of improv. So
I agree. I love it. Like I could do a whole movie just with 2 improv actors that just want to write it for me, and I'll just film them. Like I would love to do that. Yeah, it really just, as it depends on who you're working with and how they like to work.
Did you know these actors beforehand? Did you already work with them previously?
A couple actors I did. So the way that I cast this film, I wanted it to be very organic. I didn't want to do a casting call or treat it like a regular movie like I did with my other film. So the first person I reached out to was Josh Pavchek, who plays the lead actor. He's a great actor. I've wanted to work with him for a while. I worked with him like in a couple of scenes on a film I did years ago. And I've been looking for something to work on with him, but he's also a filmmaker. So he gets he gets the point of doing movies like this. And
Yeah.
so when I was casting the movie, it was all about like, okay, I don't only want the best actors. Of course, I want actors that are talented and can pull it off, but I also want actors that understand the creative process and that understand the filmmaking process, so that when it's just me holding a little mirrorless camera in, you know, some dingy motel room somewhere, they're not second guessing like, well, what am I doing here? Should I be putting in 110% when like, I don't know what this is going to look like. So I knew that Josh would get that if we filmed the way we were going to film, it could still be a really, really good movie. So he came on board first, and his girlfriend, Gabriella, came on next because I said,
Oh, that's
all right,
great. Natural
Jessica,
chemistry.
natural chemistry. They could come up with ideas together. They could rehearse when they're at home together. And she is super talented. I saw some of her stuff, and you know, so that was like a natural thing. And then from there, like we needed a character to play Eddie's sister, the main character's sister, and they referred one of their other friends, Ariel, who was great. You know, basically everyone that was cast, Maynor Alvarado, who was one of the other actors, was also friends with them. And then I brought in an actor named Brad Rader, who I had known from just my filmmaking community and online. And you know, we'd been looking for more stuff to work on together too. So it really was done in, like I said, in a very natural way. Weren't just posting like, here's who we need, you know, let's get a bunch of auditions and cherry pick someone. And you know, we might have found somebody that way that would have been a talented actor, but I don't think we would have found somebody that would have been down to kind of shoot the movie the way that we did, which was half the battle, really.